very much. And I understand Senator Warren, who got cut off earlier, is in the room. Senator Warren, if you want to finish your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Cardone. You know, I'm reminded by this how difficult it is right now for our students and for our teachers who are having to deal with technical glitches that interrupt their education every day, and why this package is so important to get the resources into our schools so we can get those schools open for learning for all of our kids in person. So thank you. When you and I were interrupted by technical problems, we were talking about the fact that you are a first-generation college student and that the opportunities that were available to go to college without debt a generation ago are just not there now. And we were talking about the 43 million Americans who are struggling with student loan debt, about $1.5 trillion in student loan debt. And at least when I lost you in this process, you were starting to talk about what it means that 40% of those who are dealing with student loan debt don't have a college diploma. So what does that mean in terms of the impact of student loan debt on their lives?
It's a significant impact. I think 1.2 million default every year. And what we do know is if you didn't graduate, you didn't get your degree, your earning potential is not what it would be if you did. So I think what it does is exacerbate issues for those who are unable to pay.
Yeah. And can you say a word about how student loan debt is impacting Black and Latino students?
It's disproportionately affecting them more. I recently read that for Black students who graduate 12 years later, they're still paying more than they were starting with when they took the loan out because of the interest. So 12 years after starting the loan, they owe more. Yeah. That's exacerbating gaps. That's perpetuating, the haves and have-nots.
A deep hole that keeps getting deeper. And here's something that may come as a surprise to many Americans. Student loan debt is one of the biggest contributors to rising debt loads by seniors. There are older Americans who are still paying off student loan debt in their 60s, in their 70s, even in their 80s. In fact, tens of thousands of Americans have had their Social Security checks garnished for student loan debt. So, in other words, the impact is felt everywhere. And even before this economic crisis, before this pandemic, the economic effects of student loan debt were holding back our economy. So, Dr. Cardone, this is a crisis. You are in a unique position to be able to do something about it. Congress gave the Department of Education tools to help borrowers with student loan debt. Let me ask you, will you commit to doing everything you can to use those tools to provide borrowers with immediate relief?
Yes, Senator.
Good. And one of those tools is overseeing the Office of Federal Student Aid under your predecessor, Betsy DeVos. That office was on the side of greedy student loan servicers instead of borrowers. Will you commit to developing a plan to reform FSA so that it works for student borrowers instead of for big corporations?
Yes, Senator.
Good. I really appreciate those commitments that could make an enormous difference in the lives of millions of people across this country. One route that I'm going to continue to urge you to take is administrative cancellation of student loan debt. The law on this is clear. Congress gave the power to the Secretary of Education, and the past two secretaries, and yes, that includes Betsy DeVos, used it. So if confirmed, that tool will be waiting on your desk when you are sworn in, and that is tremendous power to help. As you know, Majority Leader Schumer and I have outlined how you and President Biden can immediately cancel $50,000 in student loan debt, and I look forward to working with you to provide the relief that our students need. Thank you so much for agreeing to serve.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
And I'm the only one with gloves and everything. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It is a delight to be here with Majority Senate Leader Chuck Schumer, Senator Warren, and my colleagues on the House side. Millions of Americans can't afford to put food on the table and feed their families. Millions can't pay rent and face housing insecurity. Millions lost their jobs during the pandemic and can't afford basic necessities. The last thing people should be worried about is their student debt. Nearly 45 million Americans are shackled with student loan debt, and the amount of debt the average student carries continues to rise. We know that student debt is not a result of bad decisions or behavior. It is the result of a broken system that tells students to get an education or go to college in order to have a stable life, but then does not provide the resources to afford that education. It is the result of a two-tiered system, one for the rich families who can afford tens of thousands of dollars for higher education, and another for the poor and the middle class who have to pay off that education for the rest of their lives. I always say America does not suffer from scarcity, we suffer from greed. We can choose to lift the burden of millions of people face. We can actually invest in the future of the American people. Today, we are taking a needed action to tackle the student loan debt crisis by using executive authority under the Higher Education Act to cancel up to $50,000 in student debt for federal loan borrowers. This is an important first step, but we can and must go bolder. We cannot be too bold in responding to the pandemic and providing needed help to the American people. I have been encouraged by the steps President Biden has taken to tackle the student debt crisis and hope he uses his executive authority to move towards full student debt cancellation. The American people are counting on us to meet this moment and implement meaningful change. I promise I will not stop fighting until we have ended the student loan debt crisis and cancel student debt for everyone in America. And I am so glad to be in this fight with my colleagues.
All right.
Jones?
Last but not least, Congressman Jones, D. New York.
It is hard to go after so many luminaries, my goodness. I am thrilled to be here with my colleagues in the House and in the United States Senate, calling on President Biden to address an urgent issue, the student debt crisis that exists to the tune of $1.7 trillion. 81 million Americans elected Joe Biden President of the United States, and they gave him a mandate to deliver real change and real solutions after 4 years of destruction, failure, and inequality. The $1.7 trillion national student debt crisis is due in part to the fact that wages have remained stagnant for decades, even as the cost of a college education has skyrocketed. And we know in this country that for the vast majority of good-paying jobs, a college education is required. In my district, in Westchester and in Rockland counties, where it is extremely expensive to live, thousands of young people my age and younger have to live at home with their parents or their grandparents because they can't afford to live independently. They can't afford rent or mortgage. That's not their fault. They've done everything that they were supposed to do. And now this president must do what he is supposed to do. We understand that this president knows his ability to use authority under the Higher Education Act to cancel student debt. And In fact, that is obvious because he has used that same authority to pause student loan payments and the accrual of interest. Now he must go further. He must cancel $50,000 in student debt for those who have loans that are federally owned. And of course, as you heard earlier, this is an issue of racial justice. Black and Hispanic people disproportionately bear the brunt of the student debt crisis that I described, but I would also add that this is an issue of LGBTQ plus justice. Members of the LGBTQ community, largely because their families tend to disown them, disproportionately have higher student debt. So this president must do the things that he ran on. He must recognize this moment in which we face overlapping crises, not least of which is that national student debt crisis that many of us have described today. And he must forgive that so that we can liberate an entire generation of young people to meaningfully participate in this economy, create jobs, and finally have an economy that works for everybody, not just the wealthy few and large corporations that tend to take advantage of working people who have borne the brunt of this student debt crisis. And the president, of course, can do this with a stroke of a pen. That is exactly what we here today expect him to do, and that is what the American people expect from him. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, on the American Rescue Plan. Late last week, President Biden signed the American Rescue Plan into law. The most significant federal recovery effort in decades is now underway. $14 to $100 checks are heading out the door to 85% of American households. Relief for schools, businesses, families, and state and local governments is starting to arrive. Shots are going into the arms of Americans from coast to coast. More than 135 million doses of the vaccine have now been delivered. Over 100 million doses have now been administered. That's 1/3 of the population, and much more quickly than had been previously projected. And our economy is poised for its own shot in the arm. As the American Rescue Plan begins to take effect, economists are projecting that American economic growth could more than double as a result of this bold, strong legislation. Already, Americans are more optimistic about businesses being able to reopen, jobs coming back, and the national economy taking off. As one headline read over the weekend, Americans see better days ahead in pandemic and economy. After the American Rescue Plan passed through the Senate a little over a week ago, I've been highlighting parts of the bill that may have escaped notice, and there are so many. We all know about the $1,400 checks. We all know about the shots in the arm. But today I want to take some time explaining how it helps our nation's students. First of all, the American Rescue Plan provides substantial emergency relief to colleges and universities weighted towards those colleges and universities without million-dollar endowments. Fully half of that funding must be used for emergency financial aid grants to students, at least $20 billion nationwide. And of course, many students will benefit from the $1,400 checks. Any student with a young family will benefit from the historic expansion of the child tax credit. But these emergency financial aid grants are another way that students with exceptional need can access relief. That's not all. The American Rescue Plan also sets the stage for President Biden to deliver incredibly meaningful student loan forgiveness by making all types of student loan forgiveness tax-free through December. At the moment, debt cancellation is usually treated as taxable income. So without this provision, forgiving a student's debt would stick them with a tax bill, giving with one hand, taking away with the other. This would apply to more than 100,000 students who are already in repayment programs that offer some student loan forgiveness. Crucially, this tax provision would apply to future efforts to forgive student loans as well. I believe the current administration has the legal authority to forgive up to $50,000 in federal student loan debt, a life-changing policy decision that would boost our economy and help close the racial wealth gap. 20 years after starting college, the median white borrower will owe 6% of their debt, while the median black borrower owns 95% of their debt. Canceling up to $50,000 in student debt would close the racial wealth gap by 28 percentage points among those households. That's just one of the many reasons Senator Warren and I have been advocating this policy to cancel $50,000 of student debt. And as I mentioned, it's become an issue of racial justice as well. President Biden, to his credit, has already proposed some student loan forgiveness, up to around $10,000. But now, one of the objections that some in the administration have had, that the students, when we forgive debt, will have to pay taxes, is gone, 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 because of the ARP. And I particularly want to thank Senators Menendez and Warren for their work on these provisions. For much of American history, education has been the ladder up. For too many these days, student debt has become the anchor weighting them down, making it harder to start a family, buy a home, plan a career, and so much more. The pandemic has stressed student finances even closer to the breaking point. Thankfully, the American Rescue Plan not only delivers short-term relief, but clears the way for long-term relief for American students by saying, when we forgive your debt, you don't have to pay taxes on it. And American students collectively bear more than $1.7 trillion in student debt. When you think of young people, and they're starting out their lives, and there's so much excitement and enthusiasm, and then they have $1.7 trillion of debt on their shoulders, weighting them down. That's not the American way of sunny optimism and can-do. This system sprung out of control in many ways, going after the for-profit colleges and making sure they don't take advantage is one way we're trying to curtail it. But for the students who have this debt, future actions won't do any good in terms of changing the way we finance colleges and how we deal with the for-profits. The best way is canceling $50,000 in student debt, and the good news, the ARP makes sure no taxes are owed on any of that cancellation. So no matter how their team performs during March Madness this weekend, the American Rescue Plan gives every student something to cheer about. Go Syracuse.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.
Much. Thank you. So it is good to be here today with all of you. LaKayla, I want to start by saying thank you so much for telling your story, because we are here about stories of millions of people across this country who have a story that may not be identical to LaKayla's, but it resonates with it. People who took out student loan debt because they were trying to do their best. They were trying to get an education, and who, through one move or another, are now caught in a debt nightmare. We are calling on President Joe Biden to end that nightmare. We are calling on him for justice. I am so glad to be here today with Attorney General Healy. As she rightly pointed out when we started, this is not our first time to come in here to talk about student loan debt and to fight back on behalf of people who've been tricked, trapped, and smashed by student loan outfits that have cheated them. It is not our first time to come in and talk about the overwhelming debt loads that young people are dealing with today. And I'm glad to be here again, but I have to say, it's time for real action so that we can get this done and move to other issues. I also want to say a very special thank you to my partner my co-conspirator in so many efforts on behalf of justice across the Commonwealth and across the nation. Ayanna Pressley has been a fighter on the student loan issue from the very beginning, and she brings a strength and a moral clarity to it that convinces me, three tough women, we're going to get this done. Four. You're exactly right. I was thinking of those of us who had official roles in this. It's 4 and it's millions more. Thank you. Thank you so much. We're here today to call on President Biden for justice. Canceling $50,000 of student loan debt is a matter of racial justice. It is a matter of economic justice. It is a matter of generational justice. On racial justice, canceling $50,000 of student loan debt would close the black-white wealth gap in America for those who have student loan debt by 25 points. There is no other single action that the President of the United States could take to help close that gap, to help bring families together, to help lift up families who generation after generation have been left behind in the effort to build real wealth and wealth across generations. It is a matter of economic justice. Canceling $50,000 of student loan debt is a matter of acknowledging that people who have tried to get an education and end up with student loan debt are disproportionately those who come from families that can't afford to write a check for college. 40% of the people who are dealing with student loan debt were not able to finish college. They had babies, they had 3 jobs, the transportation fell through, life happened. And they find themselves in jobs now that pay the way a job does for someone with a high school diploma, but struggling to deal with student loan debt. Young people today increasingly cannot start small businesses if they have student loan debt. So here we are at a moment in our economy as we're trying to come out of this pandemic when so many small businesses have closed, when so many small businesses are struggling, a time when a new generation could come in and open up those businesses, open up those restaurants. And if you don't have student loan debt, you got a chance to do that. But for those who are already dealing with a monthly payment that has to be made month after month after month, that means the opportunity to start a business is just not there for them. And this is something that we were seeing even before the pandemic. So the Federal Reserve had tracked the data that show that new business formation is being held back by student loan debt. Same thing is true on buying homes. People are not able to buy homes if they are dealing with a student loan debt burden. So if we want to give everyone in this country opportunity, that starts with letting them get an education without getting crushed by student loan debt. And we start on that by canceling a big chunk of the student loan debt that is out there. And the third, this is a matter of generational justice. You know, I have people say to me, people who are my age, who say, well, I went through college, worked a part-time job, and I didn't have to take on any student loan debt. True, because you had alternatives to get a college degree without going deep into debt. I went to a state school that cost $50 a semester. For a price I could pay for on a part-time waitressing job, I could finish a 4-year diploma and become a special needs teacher. That opportunity is simply not out there today. For young people who are trying to get an education, unless they come from a family that can afford to write a check for tuition, it means debt. That is not how we build a future. We need to invest in the people who are struggling with student loan debt today. And the best way we can invest in them is cancel $50,000 of student loan debt. We're here today to ask President Biden, please listen to the people across this country who need your help. Listen to those who want to build a stronger America going forward. Cancel student loan debt and give them the chance to do that. Thank you all, and I think we'll take some questions. I'll clean up here.
Let's take questions from the room here first.
And
I'll ask for the response. Just repeat the question so folks on the Zoom can hear. Anyone here?
Come next to you, LaKayla. There we are.
I'm nowhere an expert on this issue, but does canceling up to $50,000, does that further the advantages of folks who maybe went to more expensive schools, more prestigious schools, maybe have those jobs that are higher wage earners? I don't know if you could explain that dynamic to us at all.
So canceling student loan debt, canceling $50,000 worth of student loan debt will wipe out student loan debt for about 85% of all those who are currently carrying student loan debt. One of the problems we have right now with student loan debt, it's affected so many people across such a range that people like LaKayla may have $27,000 worth of student loan debt, but that is enough to keep you from buying a home. It may be enough to keep you from starting a small business. It may be enough to ruin your credit, enough to hold people back. When we looked at all the numbers around student loan debt, what we discovered is that what $50,000 will do is it will help close the racial wealth gap, and it will free up many of those who were not able to graduate from college from having any debt, so that they are free and clear. And then for those who have even more debt, it puts them ahead so they'll be able to pay down. I probably should have added, this may be helpful on your question. I'm not quite sure if I'm getting all the parts of your question. 2 out of every 3 people who goes to a state school today has to borrow money in order to graduate. So student loan debt is hitting the people who are trying to find an education that they can afford, but they just can't manage it. And
thank you. So there was a report out of Orlando this morning, actually, that the president has asked his education secretary to create a memo looking into his legal authority to forgive loans or cancel the loan debt. Wanted to get your reaction to that and what steps need to happen beyond.
First, the last amount that it's my understanding that President Biden had proposed was $10,000. Well, that's great, because in all the conversations that I've been a part of with impacted people, they see that $10,000 as not even interest. Congress gave President Biden the authority through the Higher Education Act to cancel debt. And so while we have introduced resolutions and legislation to get at this, why should the American people continue to struggle under the weight of this and wait for a legislative process when President Biden, with the stroke of a pen, by executive action, authority given to him through the Higher Education Act, can immediately mitigate this hurt? And again, this is critical to a just, robust, and equitable recovery from this pandemic. This is the moment. This does jumpstart the economy. And it's about the recovery, it's economic justice, it's racial justice, it's generational justice. And these goals are all consistent with the things that have been verbally expressed by this administration that they want to do. I'm in ongoing communication with the White House, and I'm grateful that those lines of communication remain open. I've been encouraged by those conversations, but I told them, listen, if you're going to speak to the role that Black women have played on the ballot and at the ballot box, Black women are the most educated and the most burdened by student debt. So you can say the words of appreciation. Policy is my love language. Cancel student debt. So he has the authority and, moreover, the mandate, a decisive mandate from the diverse coalition that elected him.
And Jillian has one last question from the.
You don't have to do it. Should have gave her more time. Thank you so much, Representative Bowman, for hosting this critically important special order hour tonight.
I love how, Representative Bowman said something that really resonated with me when I was a senior in high school. They really did make it sound like that money was free. That money was far from free, Representative Bowman, as we know. Students in our country have become profit centers. They really, truly have. And it is ruining lives. One of the first ever town halls I had when I first got elected was in Western Wayne, in Wayne County, Michigan. And a young lady, after I opened it up for questions, stood up. She stood up very strong and looks up at me and starts crying in tears, telling me just how incredibly hard it is to be able to survive, become a homeowner, to be able to move on. She told me about how much it felt like she was trapped, like she was hostage to the student loan debt. And the fact that all she wanted to do is give back. She wanted to get her degree and come back to the community that raised her, come back to the community and give back. And it was so incredibly hard. Today, as we hear over and over again, 50 million of our neighbors across our country owe trillions in outstanding student debt. That alone should resonate with so many of my colleagues. This must become a national priority. And one of the things that I think is important as we hear about these stories is the human impact. When I was I was the first in my family to graduate from high school. My father only went up to 4th grade education, my mother 8th grade education. My father came here at 19 years old. Could have never imagined, of course, their daughter being able to graduate from high school, go on to college. And yes, I worked full-time, Monday through Friday, and took weekend classes to get my law degree, and still close to $200,000 in debt. And I still owe about $70,000. And most of it was interest. Most of it was our own government making money and profit off of me. And guess what? I didn't go to the for-profit entities. I went to legal aid. I worked at the nonprofit organization fighting for, the right to breathe clean air, to fight for the worker that was getting their wage, taken and stolen from their employer. I went and worked on immigrant rights and so much more. And all of that to say, we have to stop treating as if folks that are paying for education, as if they bought some bougie car or some big, something beyond that. No. They were seeking an education because, as many of my colleagues will tell you, there was that counselor in the hallway that would pull us aside and say, Rashida, where is your application for college? You got to apply. And I'm like, I'm the eldest of 14, Coach Watson. It was Coach Perry Watson at Southwestern High School. He still remembers pulling me into his office because he didn't get an application from me. And I said, I'm the eldest of 14. I can't go to bat. My parents, who are working class folks, my dad worked at the Line and Ford Motor Company, and say, hey, Dad, help me out here. I want to go to college. And so all that to say is, yeah, they sat us down. Of course there was the Pell Grant and all of that. Of course there was. But at the end, it was still struggle. It was a still struggle because guess what? Some of that money, you couldn't use it for certain things. I remember this. They changed stuff a little bit after I graduated. But I had to work. I had to figure out how to pay for the gas to get to the school and so much more. But I think it's really important to know, alone in my home state of Michigan, I think the average loan borrower now is like around over, close to $35,000 in debt. And you have to add on the health care cost, the rent, the utilities, car payments, and so much more to just really live your life. And so majority of our American people, our neighbors right now, educated not, live check by check. They literally live check by check. And add that, the average of $250 or more for student loans. It is really holding people back. And when I look at my state, my district is third poorest congressional district in the country. When I look at the eyes and look at the families that I represent and they come to our town halls, they talk to them about the struggles and, please help. Make government about people. Make it about us. Put us first. One of the things that I continue to hear the common theme is we didn't do anything wrong. We just went to go get access to higher education, and they feel like they're being penalized. They feel truly that, the interest rates, I read this, the interest rates are one of the silent killers when it comes to debt repayment. that they feel like they're being punished for doing something that they were taught to do, right? They go to college, do right, work hard, and they feel like they're being penalized. And the cost of education in our country just continues to increase. We all know that. We see it over and over again. And so what sounds like can't be solved, that is something impossible, it actually is not that complex. President Biden has the ability, this administration has the ability, with the stroke of a pen, to help millions of our neighbors across the country to get out of student debt. We are, far from putting this pandemic behind us. It's been a struggle for many of us. And yes, these payments are going to be coming due. Folks are so anxious about it. Even planning now, folks even sending me messages social media about what do I do about Christmas, because I know around the corner I got to start repaying the student loans. It's difficult to put into words just how big of a difference relieving this heavy burden would make in the lives of so many of my residents. I'm grateful to stand here with many of my colleagues, joining in this fight. Rarely, if ever, in politics are you represented with an easy solution or with, such an impossible problem, but this one isn't. This one's pretty easy. We're the ones, the government is profiting off of people, and we got to stop. I think when we again make government about people and we put them first, then I think it's going to be an easy decision for the administration and for President Biden to come up with the plan that's needed to really help that young lady that came to my town hall and so many others in making this a national priority. I can tell you they all know and they're all doing what they were supposed to be doing. And at the end, they're still struggling. And I know my colleague is not a millionaire, but I always like reminding people of this. Majority of my colleagues in this chamber are. They don't understand the struggle of living check by check. They don't understand, some of them may not be close in understanding the pain of that student loan debt that's really heavy on so many families. And so I stand here in solidarity with my colleagues in asking, let's do the right thing. Let's make this a national priority. Let's get an executive order done, and let's help millions of Americans that did nothing wrong except wanting to access a higher education, as they were told was access to a beautiful, viable, vibrant life in our country. And again, we can't continue to make them a profit center. We have to make them our priority, and that they deserve to be able to live and thrive in our country. Thank you so much, and I yield.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Tlaib, for your powerful words. It is now my honor to recognize the gentlewoman from Texas, Congresswoman to me, Congressman Espaillat.
Thank you, Representative Bowman. Don't forget, I also represent Manhattan. And I am a Latin from Manhattan.
That's right.
And I thank you for giving me the opportunity to address this incredible issue. Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of canceling student debt for over 43 million Americans. In fact, Madam Speaker, student debt for some time now has surpassed credit card debt for America. Mind-boggling. It is considered that for many Americans, they could be indebted for a significant period of their adult lifespan. And those that have children and then choose to help them out could be indebted for an entire life. And so this is not the way a country should move forward. And for more than a decade, mounting student loan debt has made it difficult for many Americans to purchase a home, to start their own business, to move forward and aspire to be part of the middle class or the advancement that this nation should promise all its people. They have difficulties saving for the future of their families. So this is a transgenerational crisis. It is far beyond one generation. Recent data shows that borrowers in the United States owe collectively $1.6 trillion in federal and private student loan debt. With the surge of the coronavirus cases and the rise in unemployment claims, the student loan crisis only worsened. It became a very deep crisis, not only impacting American futures, but putting in jeopardy the immediate needs and well-being of American families. And as a strong proponent of student debt cancellation, I was proud to join my colleagues in responding to the growing crisis. Democrats in the House of Representatives led a bipartisan effort to provide economic assistance and relief to student borrowers in the CARES Act, which was extended in the American Rescue Plan. So we have a record, Madam Speaker, of trying to throw a lifeline to all these borrowers that are drowning in debt. And earlier this year, I was proud to join my colleagues in calling for a bold plan to tackle the student loan debt crisis and cancel up to $50,000 in student loan debt for federal student loan borrowers. Failure to cancel student loan debt will continue to gravely affect the quality of life of millions of Americans. Like the coronavirus pandemic, student debt disproportionately affects low-income, working class, and communities of color. We must work to create a more equitable outcome for everyone. Student loan cancellation isn't only relief for debt holders, it is also one of the most effective ways to stimulate our economy. Let's be smart about this, Madam Chair. Let's be smart about this. Let's unshackle and unsaddle people from their debt so they can have just a little bit more money in their pocket and spend it in local businesses. They will not run away to an European vacation. They will not go to the south of France. They will go to the local store and spend their money there in emergency items, milk, Pampers, food. So let's help them out. When Americans aren't burdened by student loans, they are more easily able to start businesses and help their families. Removing financial barriers allows Americans to more easily join the workforce as well. So not only will it stimulate local businesses and small businesses, which continue to be the biggest employers in America, but it would also help people come back to the workforce. I look forward to working with my colleagues in the Congressional Progressive Caucus to provide relief and economic justice to the millions upon millions of struggling debt owners under a mantle of student debt. And I yield back to my colleague, my distinguished colleague from the Bronx and from Mount Vernon and from Rockland County and all the other areas that he distinguishes in representing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressman Espaillat. Before you go, Congressman Espaillat, I want to underscore what you said about people investing in their own communities when they have more money in their pockets. And you just made me think of all of the young children who want to take art classes and